A quiet teenage girl sat alone on the plane, looking at her phone like any normal student. Nobody knew her secret. When the captain suddenly quit flying and walked away at 18,000 feet, panic filled the cabin. 213 passengers faced death. Then this young girl stood up and shocked everyone with words nobody expected to hear. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Maya Rodriguez sat in seat 14C, her backpack wedged beneath the seat in front of her, earbuds dangling around her neck as she scrolled through her phone with the practiced disinterest of a 17-year-old who had made this flight between Phoenix and Seattle dozens of times. Her oversized hoodie and worn sneakers marked her as unremarkable among the 213 passengers aboard Pacific Airways Flight 447, just another teenager traveling alone on a Tuesday afternoon, probably visiting divorced parents or heading to some college visit that her teachers had arranged. The flight attendant who had checked her boarding pass earlier had smiled with that particular brightness adults reserve for young solo travelers, asking if this was her first time flying alone and whether she needed help finding her seat, speaking slowly and carefully as though Maya might not understand the concept of row numbers and letter designations. Maya had nodded politely, offering the shy smile that adults expected from teenage girls, playing the role perfectly while internally cataloging the Boeing 737-800's configuration, noting the wing position relative to her seat, calculating the aircraft's probable weight based on passenger load and the fuel requirements for a 2-hour flight covering approximately 900 nautical miles. The elderly woman in 14B had patted Maya's arm when she sat down, making small talk about school and asking what grade she was in, whether she was nervous about flying, commenting that young people these days were so brave to travel alone when she herself had never flown without her husband until she was in her 40s. Maya had responded with the expected teenage pleasantries, mentioning that she was a senior in high school, that she was visiting her aunt in Seattle, that yes, she did feel a little nervous sometimes but her phone and music helped. She did not mention that her father, Captain David Rodriguez, had been a commercial airline pilot for 22 years before his death from a sudden heart attack 18 months ago, that he had spent countless hours teaching her everything about aviation from the time she could walk, that she had logged over 800 hours in flight simulators ranging from basic programs to professional-grade equipment that replicated every system on a commercial airliner. She did not mention the flight manuals she had memorized, the emergency procedures she could recite in her sleep, the aviation podcasts she listened to instead of music, or the fact that she had been accepted to 3 university aviation programs and planned to earn her commercial pilot's license before her 20th birthday. The captain's voice came through the speakers 30 minutes into the flight, smooth and professional, announcing that they had reached their cruising altitude of 34,000 feet, that the weather in Seattle was partly cloudy with temperatures in the mid-50s, that they should arrive on schedule in approximately 90 minutes. Maya recognized the subtle signs of experience in his voice, the measured cadence that came from thousands of hours in the cockpit, the slight Southwest accent that suggested Texas or New Mexico origins, the practiced reassurance that passengers found comforting. She wondered how many flights he had completed in his career, whether he flew this route regularly, whether he loved aviation the way her father had loved it, with a passion that transcended the routine and made every flight feel like a small miracle of physics and human achievement. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with their beverage cart, and when they reached Maya's row, the younger attendant addressed her with exaggerated cheerfulness, asking if she would like something to drink, offering her a whole can of soda rather than just a cup, treating her with the special attention that adults gave to children traveling alone. Maya accepted a ginger ale and returned to her phone, where she had pulled up a technical aviation forum discussing crosswind landing techniques in various aircraft types. The posts were dense with terminology and debate about rudder application and wing-low methods, conversations that would have been incomprehensible to the average person but read like poetry to Maya. Her father had taught her to think of flying as a conversation between pilot and aircraft, a constant exchange of information and adjustment, a relationship built on understanding the machine's capabilities and limitations while respecting the fundamental principles of aerodynamics and physics that made flight possible. He had taken her to airports throughout her childhood, pointing out different aircraft types, explaining their characteristics and quirks, teaching her to identify planes by their engine configuration and wing design. When she was 12, he had started letting her sit in flight simulators during his recurrent training sessions, watching as she worked through the same emergency scenarios that professional pilots practiced, noting her natural aptitude and her complete lack of fear when faced with simulated disasters. The first indication that something was wrong came 55 minutes into the flight, when Maya noticed the flight attendants conferring in hushed tones near the forward galley, their body language tight and concerned, their professional smiles replaced by barely concealed anxiety. The beverage service had stopped abruptly, and the lead flight attendant, a woman in her 40s with short dark hair and a name tag reading, Jennifer, was speaking urgently into the interphone, her face pale, her hand gripping the handset with white-knuckled intensity. Maya sat up straighter, her teenage passenger facade slipping slightly as her trained awareness kicked in, noting details that the other passengers missed in their absorption with movies and magazines and conversation. The aircraft's flight path felt different, the subtle changes in engine sound and slight variations in altitude suggesting that something in the cockpit was not proceeding according to standard procedures. She had spent enough time around aviation to develop an instinct for normalcy, and this flight had stopped feeling normal. Jennifer hung up the interphone and immediately grabbed the public address system handset, her voice carefully controlled but unable to completely mask the underlying tension when she spoke to the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your lead flight attendant speaking. We're going to need your attention for a moment. We are experiencing a situation that requires us to ask if there are any passengers aboard with pilot experience or significant aviation knowledge. If you have any flight training, any professional aviation background, or extensive flying experience, please press your call button immediately or identify yourself to a flight attendant. This is an urgent request." The cabin erupted in confused murmurs and worried conversations, passengers looking at each other with growing alarm, the careful pretense of routine air travel suddenly shattered by the realization that something serious was happening at 34,000 feet with 213 people aboard. Maya's hand moved toward the call button, then hesitated, her 17-year-old appearance suddenly a liability rather than an asset. She knew that revealing her knowledge would require her to convince adults to trust a teenage girl in a crisis situation, that her age would work against her credibility, that people would question whether someone her age could possibly possess the skills needed to help in a genuine aviation emergency. But she also knew that the urgency in Jennifer's voice suggested a situation serious enough that the crew was desperate for any assistance, and that her training and knowledge, while unconventional, were real and extensive. She pressed the call button, her heart rate increasing not from fear but from the adrenaline of anticipated action, the same feeling her father had described when he talked about handling emergencies during his career. Jennifer appeared at her row within seconds, bending down to speak to Maya with an expression that mixed hope and doubt. "Did you press your call button, sweetie? Do you have flying experience?" The diminutive address stung slightly, but Maya kept her voice steady and professional, meeting the flight attendant's eyes directly. "Yes, ma'am. I have extensive aviation knowledge and significant simulator experience. I've studied commercial aircraft systems and emergency procedures extensively. My father was a commercial airline captain, and he trained me in aviation operations from a young age." Jennifer's expression flickered through several emotions in rapid succession, hope dimming as she processed Maya's age, disappointment settling in as she clearly struggled to believe that a teenage passenger could provide meaningful assistance in a cockpit emergency. "Honey, I appreciate that, but we're looking for actual pilots, people with professional flying experience. Have you ever actually flown a plane, like gotten a pilot's license?" Maya had anticipated this response, had known that her age and appearance would create immediate skepticism, but the dismissal still frustrated her. "I don't have an official license yet, but I have over 800 hours in professional-grade simulators, including full-motion simulators used for commercial pilot training. I've studied Boeing 737 systems extensively, and I know emergency procedures for multiple aircraft types. I understand if that doesn't sound like enough, but if there's a genuine emergency and you need someone with technical knowledge, I can help." Jennifer looked torn, clearly wanting to dismiss this teenage girl's claims but also recognizing the desperation of their situation. "Wait here," she said finally, hurrying back toward the cockpit, leaving Maya sitting in tension while the elderly woman in 14B patted her hand and whispered that it was very sweet that she wanted to help but that the adults would handle whatever was wrong. The next few minutes felt eternal, the cabin's anxiety level rising as passengers noticed the flight attendant's obvious distress and the continued absence of any updates from the cockpit. Maya saw Jennifer emerge from the forward area again, this time accompanied by another flight attendant, both of them scanning the cabin as though searching for anyone else who might have aviation credentials. They spoke briefly to a middle-aged man several rows ahead who shook his head apologetically, explaining that he had taken a few flying lessons years ago but had never finished his private pilot license. They asked an older gentleman who had pressed his call button, but he admitted he had only thought they might need a doctor, revealing his medical background but no aviation experience. The flight attendant's body language grew more desperate with each negative response, and Maya realized that whatever was happening in the cockpit was serious enough that they had no better options than to consider her unconventional qualifications. Jennifer returned to Maya's row, her professional composure cracking slightly as she made a decision that clearly went against her instincts. "Okay, honey, I need you to come with me. I'm not promising anything, but the first officer wants to talk to anyone with aviation knowledge, and right now, you're the only person on this plane who's even claiming to know anything about flying. Bring your ID and follow me." Maya grabbed her backpack and phone, stepping into the aisle while 212 other passengers watched with expressions ranging from confusion to outright alarm at the sight of a teenage girl being escorted toward the cockpit during an emergency. The elderly woman in 14B grabbed her sleeve as she passed, whispering urgently, "Sweetheart, you don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. You're just a child. Don't let them pressure you into anything." Maya squeezed the woman's hand gently and followed Jennifer toward the front of the aircraft, her mind already shifting into the focused state her father had taught her to cultivate during emergencies. The cockpit door stood open, a violation of post-9/11 security protocols that immediately told Maya how serious the situation had become. Jennifer gestured for her to enter, and Maya stepped into the cramped space where two pilots normally worked in practice coordination to control an aircraft carrying hundreds of lives. The first officer, a man in his early 30s with sweat beading on his forehead and his uniform shirt collar loosened, sat in the right seat, his hands moving constantly between controls and switches, his attention divided among multiple tasks that should have been shared between two crew members. The captain's seat on the left sat empty, the control column moving in small adjustments as the autopilot maintained their flight path, the entire left side of the cockpit abandoned in a way that violated every principle of commercial aviation operations. The first officer glanced back at Maya, his expression cycling rapidly from hope to disbelief to something approaching despair when he saw her age. "You've got to be kidding me. Jennifer, she's a kid. I asked for pilots, for someone with actual flight experience, not a teenager who probably plays flight simulator games on her phone." His voice carried the sharp edge of someone operating under extreme stress, someone dealing with a crisis that exceeded his ability to manage alone. Maya understood his reaction, expected it even, but she also heard the underlying panic in his tone, the sound of a pilot who was drowning in workload and responsibility without the support he needed. She stepped forward, keeping her voice calm and professional, the same tone her father had used when dealing with difficult situations. "Sir, my name is Maya Rodriguez. My father was Captain David Rodriguez, who flew for Southwest Airlines for 22 years. He trained me in aviation operations from the time I was 8 years old. I have over 800 hours in professional-grade flight simulators, including Level D full-motion simulators that replicate commercial aircraft systems exactly. I've studied Boeing 737-800 systems, performance characteristics, and emergency procedures extensively. I know I'm young, and I know I don't have an official license, but I have real knowledge and training. Whatever's happening here, if you need assistance, I can help." The first officer stared at her for several long seconds, his jaw working as he processed this impossible situation. Finally, he shook his head slightly, a gesture that seemed to acknowledge the surreal nature of their circumstances. "I'm First Officer Brian Chen. The captain, Captain Mitchell, he just quit. 40 minutes ago, he started talking about how he couldn't do this anymore, how the pressure was too much, how he needed to stop flying. I thought he was joking at first, but then he just unbuckled and stood up and walked out of the cockpit. He's sitting in the back galley, completely unresponsive, refusing to come back. I've been trying to handle everything myself, but I can't manage the radios and navigation and all the monitoring systems alone, and we're going to need to start our descent into Seattle soon, and I've never done a single pilot landing in a commercial aircraft, and I have 213 people depending on me, and I'm starting to think I can't do this. The words spilled out in a rush, the confession of a pilot facing his own limitations and the terrifying responsibility of sole command. Maya's mind raced, processing the situation with the analytical approach her father had drilled into her during countless training sessions. A pilot abandoning his post mid-flight represented a psychological emergency that created an immediate operational crisis, leaving the first officer to handle workload designed for 2 people while managing the shock and stress of his captain's breakdown. The first officer's panic was understandable but dangerous, his stress level threatening to impair his decision-making at precisely the moment when clear thinking was most critical. She needed to establish herself as a credible assistant quickly, needed to prove that her knowledge was real and useful, needed to help him regain focus and confidence before his anxiety spiraled into paralysis. "Okay, First Officer Chen, I understand the situation, and we can handle this together," Maya said, projecting confidence she partly felt and partly manufactured. "First, what's our current status? Altitude, fuel, distance to Seattle, any system issues?" Her question was deliberate, focusing his attention on concrete facts rather than abstract fears, giving him something specific to report. Chen glanced at his instruments, seeming to steady slightly as he engaged with the technical details. "We're at 34,000 feet, approximately 200 nautical miles from Seattle-Tacoma International, fuel is fine, we have about 6,000 pounds which is plenty for landing with reserves, all systems are normal except for the small issue of having half our crew refusing to do his job." "That's good, those are all manageable factors," Maya said, moving carefully to stand behind the center console where she could see both the captain's and first officer's instruments without crowding Chen's workspace. "You've kept the aircraft safe and maintained normal operations, which means you're doing exactly what you need to do. Now we need to start planning the approach and landing, which we can do systematically. Have you declared an emergency with air traffic control?" Chen nodded, his breathing starting to slow as Maya's calm presence and professional questions seemed to provide an anchor. "Yeah, Seattle Center knows we have a medical emergency with the captain, but I haven't told them I'm considering having a teenage passenger help me land a Boeing 737. That seemed like the kind of thing that might cause additional problems." Maya almost smiled at his sardonic tone, recognizing the dark humor that pilots use to cope with stress. "We don't need to give them more information than necessary right now. They know you have an incapacitated captain, they'll provide whatever support you need. Let's start working through the arrival and approach procedures for Seattle. Which runway are you expecting?" Chen pulled up the airport information on his navigation display, studying the current conditions. "They'll probably give us runway 16R, the longest runway, straight in approach, best option for this situation. But I need to start the descent soon, and I'm going to need help monitoring systems and running checklists while I'm flying, and I still can't believe I'm even considering accepting assistance from a high school student. My father taught me that aviation doesn't care about age, it only cares about knowledge and skill and the ability to stay calm under pressure," Maya said, channeling lessons her father had repeated throughout her childhood. "I know you have no reason to trust me based on my appearance, but I'm asking you to trust my training. Let me help with the radios and checklists and monitoring while you focus on flying the aircraft. You'll maintain final authority for all decisions, I'm just here to reduce your workload and provide assistance. My father always said that good crews work together by respecting each other's knowledge and supporting each other during difficult situations." She watched Chen's face as he wrestled with the decision, saw the moment when desperation overcame skepticism, when the reality of his situation forced him to accept help from an unlikely source. "Okay, Rodriguez, we'll try this, but if you show me for 1 second that you don't actually know what you're doing, you're out of this cockpit immediately," Chen said, his tone firm but no longer dismissive. "Sit in the captain's seat. Don't touch the controls unless I specifically tell you to, but you can help me with communications and checklist items. Seattle Center is on frequency 124.85. Monitor what they're saying and let me know if they have any instructions while I start coordinating our descent. Maya slid into the captain's seat, the left-hand position that her father had occupied for thousands of hours, feeling the weight of responsibility and opportunity simultaneously. The controls and instruments were exactly where her simulator training had taught her they would be, the layout familiar despite being in an actual aircraft rather than a computer-generated environment. She adjusted the seat and checked the radio panel, confirming that Chen had the correct frequency selected on the primary radio. The headset hung near her left ear, and she positioned it carefully, hearing immediately the calm voice of the Seattle Center air traffic controller managing multiple flights in their sector. Pacific 447, Seattle Center, descend and maintain flight level 240, reduce speed to 280 knots. Maya glanced at Chen, who was focused on programming the flight management computer for their descent, his fingers moving quickly across the keypad as he entered new altitude and speed constraints. She keyed the microphone, speaking with clear diction. Seattle Center, Pacific 447, out of flight level 340 for flight level 240, reducing to 280 knots. Her transmission was professional and concise, exactly matching the communication style her father had taught her during their countless hours listening to air traffic control recordings. Chen's head snapped toward her, surprise evident in his expression. You sound like an actual pilot on the radio. Where did you learn to make transmissions like that? Maya kept her attention on the instruments, watching their descent rate as the autopilot began reducing altitude. My father recorded hundreds of hours of ATC communications and made me practice transmissions until I could sound professional. He said good radio work was essential for safety and that I should be able to communicate clearly in any situation. Descent looks good, we're maintaining the assigned speed and altitude change. Chen stared at her for another moment, then turned back to his instruments, seeming to relax fractionally as he realized that Maya's knowledge might actually be legitimate. The next 15 minutes established a working rhythm between them, Chen handling the flying duties and major decisions while Maya managed communications and monitored systems, calling out relevant information and helping run through preliminary checklists. The Seattle Center controller cleared them for further descent and eventually handed them off to Seattle Approach Control, who would guide them through the arrival procedure and set them up for landing on runway 16R. Maya made each radio call smoothly, her confidence growing as she settled into the role, her training translating effectively into real-world application. Chen began asking her questions, testing her knowledge, and found that she could explain system functions and emergency procedures with accuracy that suggested genuine understanding rather than memorized facts. Okay, Rodriguez, we're about 70 miles out now, and approach is going to start vectoring us for the approach, Chen said, his voice steadier than it had been when Maya first entered the cockpit. I need you to pull up the approach plate for runway 16 our ILS approach, and we'll review it together before we start the descent into Seattle. Can you access that on the electronic flight bag? Maya navigated quickly through the tablet-based system that held all the airport charts and approach procedures, finding the instrument landing system approach plate for their assigned runway and displaying it where both pilots could view it. The chart showed the precise path they would fly, the altitudes they needed to maintain at specific points, the frequencies they would need, and the minimums they had to achieve before they could land safely. Chen studied the chart, walking through the approach mentally, and Maya watched him work, seeing the professional pilot re-emerging as he focused on the technical task ahead. We'll intercept the localizer at about 4,000 feet, then follow it inbound while descending on the glide slope. Normal landing configuration, flaps 30, VREF +5 for the speed, standard callouts. I'll fly, you monitor instruments and make callouts. If anything looks wrong, if any parameters aren't where they should be, you speak up immediately. This is going to be my first single-pilot commercial aircraft landing, and I need you to be my extra set of eyes and help me catch any mistakes before they become problems. His acknowledgement of his own vulnerability, his willingness to accept assistance from an unlikely source, marked him as a good pilot in Maya's assessment, someone who prioritized safety over ego. Seattle Approach began issuing vectors, turning them onto courses that would position them for the straight-in approach to runway 16R. Pacific 447, turn left heading 140, descend and maintain. 3000, cleared ILS runway 16 our approach, contact tower on 118.7. Maya acknowledged the clearance, reading back the instructions with precision, then reached for the radio panel to change frequencies to the tower controller who would issue their landing clearance. Chen was hand-flying the aircraft now, having disconnected the autopilot to maintain better control during the approach phase, his hands and feet working the controls with the smooth inputs that characterized experienced pilots. Maya called out altitudes and speeds as they descended, monitoring the instruments while Chen focused on flying the precise path depicted on the approach chart. The localizer needle centered as they intercepted the inbound course, and moments later the glide slope indicator came alive, showing they were slightly above the optimal descent path to the runway. Chen made small control inputs, adjusting their descent rate to capture the glide slope smoothly, and Maya watched the needle center with satisfaction, recognizing good flying when she saw it. Localizer and glide slope alive and centered, 3,000 feet, gear down speed, she called, prompting Chen to extend the landing gear. The hydraulic whine of gear deployment filled the cockpit, followed by 3 green lights indicating that all gear were down and locked, a critical confirmation that Maya noted aloud. They continued descending, the aircraft now configured for landing with gear down and flaps extending in stages as Chen called for them. Maya moved the flap lever to the positions Chen requested, feeling the aircraft's handling characteristics change slightly as each flap setting added drag and lift. The runway environment materialized ahead through broken clouds, the long concrete strip aligned perfectly with their approach path, and Maya felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with confidence. They were going to make this landing, she realized, Chen's skill combined with her assistance proving sufficient to overcome the crisis that Captain Mitchell's breakdown had created. Pacific 447, wind 170 at 8, runway 16 are cleared to land, the tower controller transmitted, and Maya acknowledged the clearance, her voice steady despite the significance of the moment. They were less than 2 miles from the runway now, passing through 1,000 feet above the ground, everything looking perfect except for the fact that a first officer was landing a commercial airliner with help from a teenage passenger because their captain had abandoned his duties mid-flight. Chen's hands moved constantly on the controls, making tiny adjustments to maintain the perfect approach path, his eyes scanning between the instruments and the view outside, his concentration absolute. 500 feet, on glide slope, on speed, landing checklist complete, Maya called, running through the items they had configured, confirming that the aircraft was ready for touchdown. Chen nodded, his jaw set with determination, and continued the approach, the runway growing larger through the windscreen, the aiming point markings clearly visible now. Maya watched the radar altimeter count down, saw the ground rising to meet them, felt the aircraft settle into ground effect as they crossed the runway threshold. Chen began the flare, pulling back smoothly on the control column to arrest their descent and position the aircraft for a gentle touchdown, and Maya held her breath as the main wheels kissed the runway with only a slight chirp of rubber meeting concrete. Chen deployed the thrust reversers immediately, and the aircraft's forward momentum began decelerating as reverse thrust and wheel brakes combined to slow their speed. They rolled out smoothly, Chen maintaining centerline with calm inputs, and Maya felt something like joy mixing with relief as she realized they had successfully completed one of the most challenging situations a flight crew could face. "Nice landing, First Officer Chen," she said quietly, meaning it sincerely, recognizing the skill required to handle the approach and touchdown under such pressure. Chen glanced at her briefly, a slight smile breaking through his intense expression. "Thanks to you, Rodriguez. I don't know if I could have managed that alone." The tower controller directed them to an exit taxiway, and Chen steered the aircraft off the runway, beginning the taxi toward their gate while emergency vehicles followed at a discreet distance, ready to respond if needed but not interfering with normal operations. Maya remained in the captain's seat, continuing to assist with post-landing flows and communications, her role not yet complete until they reached the parking position. The cabin behind them erupted in applause, passengers recognizing that they had landed safely despite whatever crisis had prompted the emergency declaration, 213 people unaware of the unlikely partnership that had guided them home. When they reached the gate and shut down the engines, Chen pulled off his headset and turned to Maya with an expression that mixed exhaustion, gratitude, and lingering disbelief. "I need to make a full report on what happened today, and I'm going to have to explain how a 17-year-old passenger helped me land this aircraft because our captain had a psychological breakdown. They're probably going to think I've lost my mind, but I don't care because we got these people on the ground safely, and I couldn't have done it without your help. Your father must have been an incredible pilot and an incredible teacher to train you this well." Maya felt emotion tighten her throat at the mention of her father, the grief still sharp 18 months after his death. "He was the best pilot I've ever known, and he taught me that aviation is about knowledge, skill, and the willingness to help others even when situations seem impossible. He would have been proud that I could use what he taught me to help today." Chen reached out and shook her hand formally, the gesture acknowledging her as a fellow aviator rather than a teenage passenger. "When you get your commercial license, which I have no doubt you will, you're going to make an outstanding pilot. You have the knowledge, the composure, and the judgment that this career requires. Thank you for stepping up when we needed you." The cockpit door opened, and Jennifer appeared along with several company supervisors and airport officials who had been alerted to the emergency. They stared at Maya with confusion and shock, clearly struggling to reconcile the teenage girl sitting in the captain's seat with the reports they had received about a passenger providing cockpit assistance during the crisis. Chen stood and addressed them directly, his voice firm and professional. "This is Maya Rodriguez, and she helped save 213 lives today. Her aviation knowledge and composure under pressure were exactly what this situation required, and I'm recommending her for official recognition from the airline. Anyone who questions her contribution can discuss it with me, but the facts are that she performed professionally and competently during an emergency that threatened everyone aboard this aircraft." The following hours involved interviews and statements and paperwork, Maya explaining repeatedly how she had acquired her aviation knowledge and what specific assistance she had provided during the emergency. Captain Mitchell was taken off the aircraft by medical personnel, his psychological crisis requiring professional intervention and ending his flying career in a single catastrophic moment. The passengers gradually learned that the teenage girl they had barely noticed during boarding had played a crucial role in their safe landing, and many approached Maya with tears and gratitude, unable to fully process how someone so young had possessed the skills needed to help in such a critical situation. The elderly woman from seat 14B hugged her tightly, apologizing for dismissing her earlier, telling her that she was extraordinary and brave and that her father was surely watching over her with pride. When Maya finally left the airport that evening, her phone filled with messages from family and friends who had heard news reports about the emergency landing, she felt changed by the experience in ways she was still processing. She had proven to herself and to others that her unconventional education had real value, that the hours spent studying and practicing and learning from her father's lessons had prepared her for genuine application. She had discovered that she could remain calm under extreme pressure, that she could work effectively with professional pilots, that her age did not disqualify her from contributing meaningfully during crisis situations. And she had honored her father's memory by using what he taught her to help others, fulfilling the responsibility that came with possessing specialized knowledge and skills. The story of Flight 447 spread quickly through aviation communities and news media, the unusual circumstances capturing public attention and sparking debates about pilot training, psychological screening, and the unexpected ways that crises can be resolved. Maya gave several interviews, always careful to credit First Officer Chen's skill and professionalism, emphasizing that she had merely provided assistance rather than flying the aircraft herself. But she also spoke honestly about her aviation education, about the value of comprehensive training regardless of traditional credentials, about the importance of teaching young people that they could develop expertise in complex technical fields through dedication and proper instruction. Several airlines reached out to Maya in the weeks following the incident, offering support for her aviation education and expressing interest in her eventual employment once she completed her training and earned her commercial license. The Federal Aviation Administration investigated the incident thoroughly, interviewing everyone involved and reviewing all data and recordings from the flight. Their final report acknowledged Maya's positive contribution while also noting the unusual nature of the situation and the questions it raised about cockpit access and crew resource management during emergencies. But they also recognized that her assistance had been valuable and that her knowledge had been applied appropriately under extraordinary circumstances. First Officer Chen stayed in contact with Maya, mentioning her situation to his friends and colleagues in the aviation industry, advocating for her talent and potential. He wrote letters of recommendation for her university applications, describing her composure and capability during the emergency, providing testimony about her genuine skills. When Maya eventually entered her aviation program at a major university, she arrived with a reputation and a story that set her apart from other students, the girl who had helped land a commercial airliner at 17 becoming a minor legend among aspiring pilots. Captain Mitchell never returned to flying, his psychological crisis revealing deeper issues that required treatment and recovery outside the cockpit. Maya felt sympathy for him rather than anger, understanding that the pressures of commercial aviation could affect even experienced professionals, that the responsibility of carrying hundreds of lives could become overwhelming under the right circumstances. Her father had talked about the importance of mental health in aviation, about the need for pilots to recognize their own limitations and seek help when needed, about the danger of allowing stress and pressure to accumulate without addressing underlying problems. Mitchell's breakdown had endangered many lives, but it had also created an opportunity for Maya to prove herself and for the industry to examine how it supported pilot well-being and managed psychological emergencies. The passengers of Flight 447 formed a lasting bond, many of them staying connected through social media and occasional reunions, their shared experience of near disaster creating relationships that transcended the random coincidence of booking the same flight. Several of them wrote letters to Maya's university, offering scholarships and support, wanting to contribute to the education of the young woman who had helped save their lives. Maya accepted their help gratefully, recognizing that the crisis had connected her to a community of people who understood how fragile safety could be and how important it was to support those who dedicated themselves to protecting others. Throughout her university years and her progression through flight training, Maya often thought about that afternoon at 34,000 feet when she had stepped out of her teenage passenger role and into the cockpit to face an emergency that could have ended in tragedy. The experience had taught her that knowledge applied with courage could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles, that age was less important than competence and composure, that her father's investment in her education had been validated in the most dramatic way possible. She carried those lessons forward, approaching each phase of her training with the seriousness and dedication that her unconventional introduction to commercial aviation had instilled. When Maya eventually earned her commercial pilot license and began flying for a regional airline, she thought often about First Officer Chen's trust in accepting help from an unlikely source, about the passengers who had unknowingly placed their lives in the hands of a 17-year-old with simulator experience but no official credentials, about the chain of circumstances that had positioned her to make a difference during a critical moment. She told the story to other young aviators she mentored, emphasizing the importance of comprehensive education and the value of learning from experienced pilots who were willing to share their knowledge. She spoke at aviation conferences and youth programs, encouraging young people to pursue their passion for flying regardless of traditional barriers, showing them that expertise could be developed through dedication even outside conventional pathways. The crisis aboard Flight 447 had revealed what Maya had always known but had never been able to prove to skeptical adults, that teenagers were capable of handling serious responsibilities when properly trained and given the opportunity to contribute. Her father had believed in her potential enough to invest thousands of hours teaching her the complexities of aviation, treating her as a serious student rather than a child playing with toys. That investment had paid off in a way neither of them could have predicted, validating his teaching methods and her learning, proving that knowledge and skill could transcend age when cultivated with care and applied with wisdom. As Maya's career progressed and she moved from regional airlines to major carriers, eventually flying the same Boeing 737 type that she had helped land during that emergency, she never forgot the lesson that crisis had taught her about the importance of staying calm, thinking clearly, and using whatever knowledge she possessed to help others. Every flight she commanded carried the weight of responsibility that she had first felt sitting in the captain's seat of Flight 447, managing communications while First Officer Chen flew the approach, understanding that hundreds of lives depended on professional competence and sound judgment. She approached each flight with the same seriousness her father had modeled throughout his career, the same dedication to safety and excellence that had made him a respected captain and an exceptional teacher. The passengers Maya flew throughout her career never knew that their captain had once been a teenage girl who helped land an aircraft during an emergency, that she had proven herself in the most dramatic way possible before she ever held official credentials. But Maya knew, and that knowledge informed every decision she made in the cockpit, every training session she conducted, every lesson she taught to the next generation of pilots who sought her mentorship. The memory of Flight 447 remained vivid decades later, a touchstone experience that had shaped her understanding of what it meant to be a pilot, to accept responsibility for others' lives, to use knowledge and skill in service of safety and professionalism. In the end, the story of a 17-year-old passenger helping land a commercial airliner after the captain's psychological breakdown became more than just an unusual incident in aviation history. It became a testament to the value of comprehensive education, to the importance of recognizing capability regardless of age, to the power of knowledge applied with courage and composure during crisis situations. Maya Rodriguez had boarded Flight 447 as an anonymous teenage passenger, her expertise hidden behind the typical appearance and accessories of adolescence, her capabilities completely unknown to the adults around her. She had landed in Seattle as a proven aviator, her skills validated under the most challenging circumstances possible, her future in aviation secured by her performance during the most critical flight of her young life. And in that transformation lay the heart of her story, the proof that sometimes the most unlikely people possess exactly the knowledge and courage needed to overcome seemingly impossible challenges and save lives when everything depends on their hidden capabilities being revealed at precisely the right moment.